Welcome to Stemless Face Up Podcast. We're here with Michael Berg. He's gonna tell us his story and about his business. And do you grow up here?
For majority of my younger life, I guess, kind of cross between here and Wyoming.
Wyoming?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, I don't think I've ever met anybody from Wyoming. Have you? Where is Wyoming?
There's a few of us. Northwest part of the country, kind of up by Idaho and Montana, kind of nestled in between them.
So pretty.
Yeah, very beautiful part of the country.
So tell us about yourself. What did you grow up here and there? What did you do as a child?
Yeah, I grew up a little bit between, Florida and Wyoming. Was originally born in Indiana, moved down to Florida very, very young. Don't really remember too much of Indiana. Lived in Florida until about 3 years old, 3 to 4, and then ended up making the transition out to Wyoming, to where went to school, everything out there until my junior year of high school. I was playing football at the time, decided that, if I wanted to take football kind of that next level, the scouting and kind of the overall sport environment of South Florida specifically was a lot better, more conducive than where I was in Wyoming at the time. And so junior year of high school, moved back down, finished up high school down here, and then went on to play college football for a few years as well.
Really? Oh,
Yep.
nice. Where did you play?
So I spent 2 years at the University of Mount Union in Akron, Ohio, or just outside of Akron, Ohio. Yeah, and then 1 year at Akron University as well.
Wow.
And then unfortunately, between high school football, college football, collision sport, played defense most of my years, so had multiple surgeries, both knees, ankle, shoulder, all by the end of it. So kind of at that end of my junior year of college, my body wasn't really responding in football the same, how I would have wished, I guess, it would have. And so at that point in time, kind of made the decision to, step away from college football, finish out my academic side, because I knew that I wanted to get into, a professional career afterwards, in which I still needed my body to kind of operate and move and kind of, be able to perform as necessary, I guess. And I figured if I would get too many more injuries in football, that would kind of hinder, that post-sport kind of life. And so made the decision, unfortunately, that junior year to kind of, hang up my cleats. But looking back on it, I think it was probably for the best decision.
Oh, absolutely. You probably would have more severe injuries just constantly.
Yeah, so then I went to powerlifting instead.
Oh, wow.
Which doesn't really help the body really too much. But but at least I felt that on the strengths, with the strength side of sports, I was able to still kind of perform and build up and everything, as opposed to with kind of what my body was telling me at the time with football.
Do you feel like powerlifting and strength training help you with your injuries?
I think so. One thing I wish, I guess, I would have been more mindful of at the time was a lot of the rehabilitative care, a lot of the rehabilitative kind of side of training and stuff that I didn't really take as seriously. Even in football, and then transitioning to powerlifting, you have obviously a lot of load and stuff when you're working out, and a lot of those really big compound movements. And I didn't focus as much on kind of the smaller muscles, a lot of the stabilizers and stuff that I think would have probably helped me in the long run.
Mm-hmm.
At that point, I was focusing on the big moves, trying to get better, trying to raise my numbers higher and higher, without maybe focusing more on kind of that rehabilitative side that I think would have carried over a lot better and would have probably helped with some of those injuries, even on the powerlifting side.
Makes sense. So what would be one thing or advice you give someone that is in that age, high school, college, football? What would you have done differently then?
Probably focus a lot more, like I said, a lot more on flexibility, a lot more on some of the rehabilitative exercises. I mean that really around stuff like your shoulders, a lot of your really like hypermobile joints. Obviously the joints that are more kind of prone to injury over time too, especially if you're talking about even in football or talking about powerlifting, where you're under the kind of that straight bar a lot, right? Whether it's in the squat position or even in the bench position, you're compromising that shoulder over and over and over again. To where I think, looking at outside those big movements, how can you work your program around that to help compensate for those injuries or help kind of overcome some of those shortfalls so you might not be injured as much.
That makes sense.
That's great advice.
What did you go to school for?
Criminal justice.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I finished with criminal justice and a degree in psychology and sociology.
Whoa.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I found, working on the criminal justice kind of the route, we talked a lot about, criminal behaviors, a lot about behaviorisms in general, and that really piqued my interest. And I found that really fascinating, learning kind of how the human mind works, how the psyche works, but but also how people become products of their surroundings. Whether it's this, social cues they grow up in, environmental cues, etc. We are really shaped heavily by that environment. So learning kind of how that propagates, how that builds over time on a person's kind of, internal or self evolution was really kind of fascinating to me. And I guess it'll kind of circle back to, why our organization Gladius was founded to begin with. I know we'll get into that. But one of the reasons for my transition from South Florida to Wyoming and to begin with when I was at that young age was there was an incident when I was young to where I was actually kidnapped and held in my own domicile at gunpoint for 8.5 hours. This was here in South Florida. It turned an 8.5 hour standoff between fellow law enforcement and this individual. My parents were stuck outside the home at the time, so imagining what as a parent you probably are thinking, what you're going through, all this craziness happening in your mind. Obviously, I'm here today. That turned, at the end of the day, that individual gave up, turned himself into law enforcement, and we're blessed for the way the situation turned out. But I think what led on this track was, for a long time in my life, I never knew that happened. Being really young, obviously, memories come and go, but also your brain's incredible how it'll suppress traumatic, whether it's traumatic stimuli from a situation like that, or otherwise, and it'll really kind of dig that hole and bury that information down deep. Where it wasn't until my junior year of high school, back here, I took, who's my fiance now, I took Taylor to prom, and her dad retired from law enforcement, so does what I'm sure every law enforcement dad does a little background search on who's taking my daughter, daughter to prom. And ends up finding this article from way back then that kind of, briefly talks about the situation and what happened. And I think it was from a local newspaper, and brought it to my attention at the end of the night. And, I took a look at it and I kind of read it over, and I'm like, I don't remember any of this. Like, that's not me. It's never come up in my family. We never talked about it. So, I just kind of passed it off. Went home that night, looked it up and kind of did some more deep diving. And certain aspects about the story register a few of the memories that did happen back then. Specifically, the area and kind of the buildings and stuff that were associated and kind of the surrounding environment. And I was like, this is starting to sound a little bit more familiar. So brought up to my parents. We had, a little bit of that conversation, a little awkward conversation at first, but really kind of brought everything to light, understood the scenario. I understood why, my parents may have felt to bring it up. Your kid potentially doesn't remember it. Why are you going to bring up the scenario, kind of rehash it and kind of make a new wound almost? But what that really kind of started me on was almost like this period of kind of self-reflection too. As you grow up, you're trying to find out who you are and stuff as a person, etc. But what it made me realize is there was a point in time, certainly after that event, where I was very introverted. I loved video games. I loved, doing online gaming. I loved kind of being in my own bubble. Not really being as much of an extrovert, being out and around people or in social kind of environments. So kind of started doing a little bit of that reflection, and it made me realize that, maybe certain behaviors when I was little was an impact, from this event, and how that can have that impact on, your long-term development as a person and kind of where you draw those social cues from. And so I think that's kind of what sparked my interest in really the psychology portion, and then the sociology kind of tie everything together, combine that with the criminal justice to kind of just understand how environments are made, specifically around kind of deviant environments and individuals in the deviancy track.
Yeah. Fascinating. How old were you?
3.
Oh, so you.
Yeah, so very young age when this happened.
Very young age. So what was your reaction when your parents saw you? Were like in disbelief, or you were like, well, it did happen, but I don't remember, so I kind of never. It's surreal, like sort of.
A little bit of the surreal mindset, because it kind of felt like there were certain aspects of it, right, that that made sense, certain aspects of it that you kind of held on to, but for the most part, I didn't remember that happened. It kind of almost, it kind of in the back of the psyche, it's kind of almost forgotten. So yeah, it was that kind of that surreal moment where it's like, okay, that was me, but it almost wasn't me in a sense, because I don't remember, have that kind of first-hand recollection of the event to begin with.
So what did you find when you went to school for psychology and sociology? Did you find any sort of answer to these? Kind of like matching the dots, sort of a little bit.
I think a little bit. And I guess the kind of the cool thing about it, right, is we as people are always trying to build out and kind of understand who we are, and really that psychological impact of it. But certain cues, especially around being introverted, maybe not being as comfortable in my environment or even in a social environment, was probably an offset because of that instance. Or at least I can go back and try to say, hey, this is where everything kind of comes together. Is that guaranteed to be the fact? No. But I guess kind of on that path to identifying, kind of finding yourself, I guess trying to find out where some of these questions and answers might lay.
That's pretty interesting. So from there, you went to the university, you graduated, and then what?
Yep. So when I graduated, my whole plan, my whole track was always looking at the military, right? And it was from the youngest age. I remember watching all the, Arnold Schwarzenegger movies, Commando, and all that, and we're like, yeah, I want to be that guy. The year that I graduated, that summer, my mom ended up having a stroke, and it really changed our family dynamic, really at its core, right? My mom. I love her to death, and she was always that figurehead, that matriarch, kind of that boss woman mentality over and over, and that really was a cornerstone of our family for a long time. And so when that changed, she still is 100% the matriarch of the family. Anybody that knows her will tell you that. But it made us as a family kind of reevaluate, where we were, what was going on, and really knew that we needed to come together as a family to kind of overcome this hurdle. So that's when I made the distinction on, rather than going the military route, I went more the defense contracting route. Did time as defense contractor for the State Department. Did training out of the academy, which used to be the old Blackwater facility out of Moorcock, North Carolina. Went through their PSD programs, went through their firearm programs, and that kind of helped elevate, I guess, a level of skill set that allowed me to kind of work more in the professional environment. Did that all the way up until 2020, where coming back to South Florida, really looked at quote unquote the security kind of defense industry as a whole, and I found it a lot of our standards in the security industry to be negligent. We live in a world now where people overpromise, they over exuberate, what their capabilities are, who they're actually putting into it, and this goes across multiple industries, but who that individual is that's actually doing that work. And now they're overcharging for it too. So they're underproviding and overcharging, and that's been heavy in the security and our defense industry as a whole, even as a nation. And so looking at a few of those principles, it's like, man, we can do this better. Understanding, now obviously knowing what the early childhood trauma was, trying to understand, what my parents felt in that situation. Our entire mindset was, we can do this better, we can up our standards, we can use true professionals and put professionals in this position, and our entire goal is to mitigate, people from feeling that same fear as my parents did at that point in time, right? And that goes for whatever that scenario may be, even down to a car crash, right? It's that moment of traumatic, information overload of your brain that we're trying to help people, understand what the risks and threats in society are today, but also how do we mitigate, and then worst case, how do we overcome if something goes wrong.
So what do you feel like right now is one of our biggest threats as a civilian?
As a civilian,
like just mom taking kids to school, just a normal.
I think we're right now with the trends, we're seeing an uptick on the random occurrences of violence. Luckily we live in an incredible state here, obviously, that has very well paid law enforcement, well trained law enforcement. But unfortunately, there's also, there's a lot of cities and a lot of states that don't see eye to eye with kind of that methodology of policing. That leads to, certain cities are failing to re-sign contracts with law enforcement, which is leading to degradation in their law enforcement personnel. Certain cities are having issues finding the funding to properly train their law enforcement to a higher level than kind of what that basic standard is. But I would say right now, one of the most common threats are, potentially random acts of violence, but more so, it's a lot of cybercrime these days. And that's, I'm sure if you turn on the news for more than 5 minutes a day, you probably see, cyber terrorist, cyber crime, cyber threat, seeing this again and again and again. But what does that mean for your individual, right? You see that, whether it's a large, medical facility getting hacked, whether you see it's our own DoD, DOJ, there's all these hacking, but what does that mean for the individual? And the answer is, we live in a society now that your personal information is probably out there somewhere. And that's the unfortunate circumstance of the way that a lot of companies do business. Whenever you go online, whether you're signing up for a new gym, whether you're going on Amazon, whenever you're swiping your credit card, whenever you're putting your information right, most of those websites, most of those companies are all tracking your information. And at some point, if you read in the fine print, a lot of those companies are also selling your information as another revenue stream. And so at some point, your information is sold. When it's sold, it ends up on these large data broker sites. Radaris is a very popular one a lot of people know about, right? What that allows you to go on is I could go on there, anybody go on there, you can go on there, pay $25. If I know your name and about really one identifying piece of information, the more the better, I can put that in and it'll populate a page. And of course, there'll be a few individuals by that name, depending on whatever information you put in. And again, if I know more information, I can really dial it down. But that website will tell you known addresses, known aliases, known neighbors, phone numbers, social security, you name it, email addresses. And then the other misconception is because you'll see the social, and it'll either be the first half or the last half of your social, because it is illegal to sell a full person's social security number. But the issue is companies like Radaris have a sister company, right? So at the end of that, you get this little dossier information. You go, awesome, I'd like to know more. Click the link, it takes to their sister company. I pay another $25, put in the exact same information, but instead of the first half of your social, there's your second half of your social.
Wow! So you take this and you combine and you get everything.
And now I know, and if you think about it, now I know your addresses, your socials, your email, all this information. But then also think about when you sign up for something, right, and something that has, privacy settings, and you put in, hey, what are your hints? Right? Think about what a lot of those hints are. Was your, for high school mascot.
Yes.
But if I go on there, I find out, okay, Nicole lived in Tennessee at this point. She lived in this area. Where's the local high school mascot? Okay, this one didn't work. Try the next one. Didn't work. Try the next one. That one worked. So through process of elimination, combined with that information, a lot of, somebody that really wants to do harm to an individual, whether it's financial or et cetera, they can usually work through that system and through process of elimination can guess right.
That's wild.
Yeah. So I think it's that threat, right, comes from yes, this is out there exists, but I think the true threat is people need to become more aware and more prepared that these kind of things exist out there. So I think that threat really comes from almost a lack of awareness, and that could be blamed on a host of different reasons. But I think the more that people become aware that, hey, these companies do have my information, they are selling my information, I can do one or two things that can really, secure my back end. I think just knowing that and being aware of that and starting to implement just those one or two things can really start to help change people's kind of overall threat profile.
Wow. So you have to really come up with some elaborate hints.
Elaborate hints.
Everything. You have to basically mask yourself for each web. Can you imagine that? Now you have to remember for every 1,000 million websites that we have.
Yeah, because every website, everything you have now, right, every store, everyone has okay, what's your email? And then most of them, hey, make an account with us. So here's a password, and I know I'm guilty of it. I use the same password for a few different things.
Sure, he does.
Right? The key is you gotta guess that password. But it's that it's kind of it's that mindset, right? And it's helping people train into a proactive mindset when it comes to their own security. And helping people break that bubble of, hey, it's not going to happen to me. I just see it on TV, right? Whether it's physical violence, cyber crimes, etc. It's okay. There is a percentage chance that this could happen to me. Let me do one or two things to even take that maybe 0.5% down to 0.1%, right? We tell all of our clients when we work with them, we can never, right? We'll work with you as much as we possibly can, but we can never guarantee you're 100% safe against every kind of crime, every kind of violence, any kind of incident, right? But what we can do is we can make you the fastest gazelle in the herd. I know I got a few people on my team that are going to love the fact that I use that analogy, but it's making that fast gazelle. So when when that theoretical lion comes out, right? And then they're hunting, they're going after the slogans. They're going after who are the easy targets, who are the people that have their information as bland, who are the people that are not doing, two-step authentication, who are these people that I can really prey on. They're not gonna, right? They're not gonna sit there, spin their wheels, spend much more time going after one person. That's gonna be the harder target. They're gonna try to go after kind of low-hanging fruit.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's
Yeah.
so wild. So, Gladius. It's my accent. I can never say it. I always get